So thanks for everyone for putting that in the chat. It's nice to know, like Christy said, where everyone's calling in from this morning. My name is Tanya True. I'm a health and safety account manager with WSPS. I will be sitting in the background on this one. I just wanted to introduce myself. I'll monitor the chat and assist. I know Christy and Teresa will do the same, but if there's anything that's missed, I will kind of ping them on that. I'll also be collecting questions just in case we couldn't get to everything. And if there's anything we weren't able to get to, we will circle back on that. So just want to introduce Christy Cork, our specialized consultant, Healthy Workplaces, and Teresa Bowen, Health and Safety Inspector from MLITSD in London here. Thank you both for joining us today.
Yep, no problem.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks, Tanya. So I'll get us started just with some sort of general housekeeping. And again, we are excited to be here. Maybe even before I get started, recognizing that we have some out-of-province guests on our session. We are a provincial organization and we follow the Occupational Health and Safety Act, which is Ontario based. So it's legislation for health and safety in Ontario. And I'm sure you recognize if you're joining from another province that the workplaces in Alberta, in Saskatchewan, in Manitoba, wherever anyone's joining from, have slightly different laws and regulations associated with occupational health and safety. So this is a bit of a disclaimer just to say that some of the content that we're talking about is legislation that is for Ontario workplaces. If you are federally regulated and you follow the Canada Labour Code, it's going to be slightly different. The message is the same, but I just want to make sure that everybody recognizes that what we're talking about today actually is Ontario based, because those are the workplaces that we primarily support. Doesn't mean it's not relevant. I want you all to stick around because I think it's really good information, but I just want to put that out there so that there's no misunderstanding before we go any further. Okay, so just there's a quick disclaimer slide there. And we do ask, or, our funder asks that we collect a little bit of information, not so that we can call you or harass you or anything along those lines, but it's important that we know when we provide funding and when we provide support and resources to different workplaces, we want to know who's joining so that we can target and make sure that we're meeting the needs of Ontario workplaces. So the Ministry of Labour, Immigration, Training and Skills Development does ask that maybe, you take a picture of this QR code. It's also going to be in the chat so you can join later. You don't have to do it right now if that's, distracting. There is a function number listed there just so that we're able to collect a little bit of information and, know who's joining so that we can base future programs on those organizations that are interested in this type of content. So I'm going to keep moving.
Yeah, so I can guarantee you we are not going to target you.
Yeah, thank you.
That does not happen.
Yes.
That does not happen.
Yeah, it's a very interesting relationship between WSPS, so the organization that I work for, and Tanya, and who's putting on this session today, and Teresa from the ministry. So Teresa is, the enforcement branch, of course, but we have a very, good working relationship. WSPS does not share information about any of the workplaces that we visit or things that you put in the comments or questions that you may have and base any of their sort of visits and things like that on any of that information. We have pretty strict boundaries when it comes to that. Teresa is here today as a resource, and we're very lucky to have her so that we can get the inspector perspective when it comes to workplace violence and harassment. But again, we promise that this information that you share does not in any way sort of, increase your likelihood of getting a visit from an inspector.
Although I would like to go to Saskatoon.
Sure. Maybe not in the winter though, right? Save that for like a nice summer visit. Okay. All right, I'm going to keep moving along here. So again, you can do that Qualtrics code later. Couple things about our Microsoft Teams meeting today. We have muted participants. We're not a huge group, to be quite honest. I think we're up to 25 participants, but sometimes we get lots and lots of participants and it can be very distracting having background noise. So we have muted the microphones as well as cameras are off for participants. You just get to look at Teresa and I today. But we are going to keep the chat open. Please participate that way. You can participate with reactions and, other stuff so that you can be engaged. We will have some poll questions. So there'll be 2 different poll questions. We encourage you to answer those. They will be confidential. We don't know who's answering what, but feel free to engage in any of those ways so that, it's nice as a facilitator as well to not feel like we're talking in cyberspace, but there's actually people there listening. So we love those reactions and asking questions questions or comments in the chat and participating in the polls is always appreciated from a facilitator's perspective. If you're not familiar yet with Microsoft Teams, it's just all at the top. There's a banner bar across the top with all of these different icons. So you can react. It's that happy face. If you click on that, it'll give different options for reactions. The chat is just over to the left of that a little bit with the thought bubble. Oh, yeah, thanks, Jessica. Jessica's excited to react. So yeah, feel free to use those. And the polls will just automatically pop up for you when they come. So some other accessibility features, you can turn on captioning if that is helpful. You'll get basically what we're saying with a slight delay. That's under the more, where there's those 3 dots at the top beside where the camera icon is. And you can also view this presentation in full screen. So if you're finding the text maybe a little bit small, depending on what you're joining from, if it's a tablet or a laptop, you can make the content larger by going to full screen mode. It does impact a little bit of your ability to participate in chats and polls. So you may want to, again, just play around with it and see what works best for you. Our goals of the safety connections are obviously to provide relevant information to not just our customers, but every workplace in Ontario or across the country, I guess, in our case today. We want to make sure, that you're getting good health and safety information, that you're able to use the information to make a meaningful difference in your workplaces, whether it's to improve policies and programs, to understand hazards and risks and appropriate controls. But we just, again, want to put information out there as often as possible. And these are free, so they're easy for people to engage, especially when they're virtually. And yeah, ask questions. I can't stress this enough. We have Teresa here. She will answer to the best of her ability. If she doesn't know an answer, we promise to get back to you. So ask as many questions, chime in the chat. This is for you, right? We can provide information, but if you have questions, please ask, because maybe it's stuff that we haven't thought of that we, could have included. So our agenda today, we're going to touch a little bit on the state of workplace violence and harassment in Ontario workplaces. I would hazard a guess that this is not unique or specific to Ontario, but relevant across Canada and probably across North America or even globally, some of the trends. What is going on with people? Why are we seeing, oh yeah, spoiler alert, there is a rise in workplace violence and harassment. Why is this happening? What is going on? And what can workplaces do proactively to understand these hazards and risks and minimize them, right? To keep their staff safe. And then we've got the legislative requirements. So we are going to make sure that when you reflect on what your workplace is doing to prevent workplace violence and harassment, that at a minimum, you are meeting the legal requirements in Ontario. So we're going to touch on what those legislative requirements are, because there is, in the Occupational Health and Safety Act, requirements for both violence and harassment. So we're going to talk about those. And again, ask lots of questions. If you're wondering, what does that mean in reality, or how can we interpret that? What is the ministry looking for? Please ask all of those questions. And then at the end, we have some resources and some opportunity for Q&A. So I would encourage you throughout the session, if you have a question that's relevant to what Teresa and I are speaking about, fire it in the chat and we will keep an eye on the chat. And if we can answer that question while we're talking about that particular topic, we will. If it's something that maybe, is better to the end because it's not quite relevant to the discussion we're having, then we'll answer that question at the end. But I know there's lots of people on the call that are helping to keep track of those questions, so we won't miss it. Okay, our first poll question. So I'll get Jessica to pop this one up. But we're asking, like, in your personal experience, so in your experience in the role that you do at your workplace, do you see or do you feel like uncivil and disrespectful behaviors are becoming more prevalent? So again, this can be if you work, this is a retail-based safety connection. So we're going to talk a lot about customers and clients. If you feel like their behaviors are becoming more hostile, more aggressive, more disrespectful to staff or to each other, let us know what you're thinking. I'll give it just another minute. Give everybody a chance to answer. I feel like we've had a few more people jump in the room here. Okay. Well, nobody is saying no, which is interesting. So most participants, 93% of you, are feeling like uncivil and disrespectful behaviors are becoming more prevalent. Now, maybe in the chat, just to get everybody sort of thinking this morning, why do you think this is happening? I'm going to pull up a slide with some of the statistics, but you can start thinking about what is going on. Why are we seeing an increase in these uncivil, disrespectful behaviors that maybe we didn't see, prior to COVID as much, or people were having a little bit better like emotional control, not feeling like it was appropriate or necessary to treat people with disrespect. And go ahead and type some of those in the chat if you want. Now, in 2022, there was a survey done in conjunction with Western University, the University of Toronto, and the Canada Labour Congress. And what they did is they surveyed about 5,000 respondents, and this was across Canada. So this isn't actually just Ontario-based. And they asked these participants, have you experienced at least one incident of workplace violence and harassment in the past 2 years? A staggering 70% of the respondents said yes. And I just want everybody to reflect on that statistic for a minute, right? 70% of these 2,000 respondents across sectors, right? So it wasn't all healthcare, education. This is across sectors. This is small, medium, and large size businesses. And 70% of these respondents said yes, they have experienced at least one incident of violence and harassment at work over the last 2 years. So that time frame would be 2020 to 2022, which I realize is right sort of in the middle of COVID. They indicated that third party and coworkers or colleagues were the most common perpetrators of workplace violence and harassment. And then some other studies sort of are showing that not just are the numbers and the prevalence increasing, but the severity and the impact that these incidents are having on workers, the frequency of them is also increasing. There's an increased fear to report, and there's new harasser tactics, which can include sort of virtual, right? We were in this hybrid, or we were in a work from home environment. I know a lot of people are going back into the workplace. Or if you're in retail, you probably were never virtual or remote anyway. But new harasser tactics, right? Coming up with different, new, creative, harmful, and hurtful ways to potentially harass workers. I want to touch quickly on this increased fear to report, because I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, and maybe some of you are in roles in your organization where you would be receiving reports of violence and harassment in the workplace, and you're saying, no, Christy, that can't be right. Like 70% of our workforce is not reporting incidents of harassment and violence, and that is true. I think people probably felt quite safe answering this survey anonymously, but the truth is violence and harassment incidents are always underreported in workplaces. So just remember, as we go through this session, just because you're not seeing a lot of formal reports or complaints or doing incident investigations does not mean things are not happening, that people are not being hurt and harmed in the workplace related to workplace violence and harassment. They are probably not reporting it to you or to HR or to health and safety. And start to think about, as we go through this session, why are people not reporting it? This is a bigger issue altogether. Is it because your mechanisms for reporting are really cumbersome? They take too long. People don't have time. It's too much effort. Maybe they feel like nothing's going to be done with the information that they provide or the report that they submit. So why are they going to waste their time? Maybe it's scary to report an incident of harassment because they don't believe it's going to be treated, with privacy, confidentiality, be a fair investigation. So really sort of start to think about, why are we not seeing the reports, right? If this is the prevalence, what is going on? Okay. All right, so I'm going to move along here, and we're going to talk about now what are these factors that are leading to increased incidents. And I appreciate the chat. I'm looking at it and all of these awesome comments, loose laws and punishments. So I'm seeing, Michael, like maybe people with inappropriate poor behaviors, but there's no consequences. People seem to be self-centered and entitled. You know what? I have that on here. This me first society, this almost selfishness where it's like, I am going to do what I need to get what I want and need, and not consider how that impacts or could negatively impact other individuals. So Tina, I absolutely agree with you on that. People, it's very me first, right? It's a very self-centered sort of approach that people may have, and they're fighting for what they want, what they need. And I think COVID a little bit did instill this mentality where, you know, a lot of people were like, yeah, group together, band together, we're in this together. But eventually it was like, oh my gosh, no, like I need to fight for my rights and freedoms. I need to fight for what's best for me, for my family, and maybe not considering others or the, you know, society as a whole. Less patience and tolerance. Yeah, Michael, I want to touch on this a little bit as well, because I think, you know, this loss of control, this victim mentality, sometimes when we have an overwhelming amount of stressors, right, that are impacting us on a day-to-day basis, it limits our or prohibits our ability to react and respond appropriately. And we almost refer to it not like as trigger stacking, but stress stacking, right, where we have all of these things that are coming at us and bombarding us. And it just takes that one last thing that exceeds our ability to control and manage our emotions and our responses. And we react in a way that maybe we normally wouldn't. And when we think of what's going on right now in society, when we've got all of these financial stressors and pressures, it is so expensive, right, to live, to put fuel in our cars, to feed our families, to put a roof over our heads if you're paying rent and mortgage rates and all of those things. We're constantly living with, I think, a slightly higher level of stress than maybe we did previously. And so when one other little thing sort of impacts us at the workplace, or a worker says, no, sorry, you can't return that, I can't give you a refund for that, or, you know, you have to wait if you're in a restaurant or something, and people are like, what? Like, I have a reservation, and people are not coping with that information very well. I think it all ties into this high level of sort of this stress that we walk around with on a day-to-day basis, especially if people are not coping or have sort of those coping mechanisms in place. The current state of the overall environment, yeah, Jordan, I don't disagree with that. There are like geopolitical issues that are constantly weighing on us, whether that's wars or politics south of the border, things happening. Like there's always things on the news, right, that create this sense of uncertainty, and we can be, you know, constantly thinking about and dwelling on. Oh yeah, Fahim, I feel like I talked a lot about what you're talking, the economic and financial stressors. Um, okay, happiness and satisfaction is fading. I hope not. I hope not, right? We just need to find new ways to cope, and when living becomes surviving, absolutely, it can create stress. That's all very, very true. So when we have people that are entering our workplaces, right, with all of these stressors and things that are going on, we need to be a little bit extra sensitive and careful about how we are interacting, how we're approaching people, because at the end of the day, the goal is to stay safe. And when we know we have individuals, or we're going to be giving them information that they might not cope well with, or that's going to be difficult to hear, we need to be really, really careful about how we deliver that, and deliver it in a way with some sensitivity. And it's not about fighting with people, right? I know I'm a really competitive person, like growing up playing sports and all of those things. And I can remember my mom telling me when I was younger, Christy, you can be right or you can be happy. And when I think about this topic and think about how we interact with people in the workplace, whether it's customers or clients or coworkers and colleagues, it doesn't always have to be this battle where I'm right, you're wrong, right? Because that's only going to lead to conflict and increased risk of things escalating. I think when it comes to workplace violence and harassment, it's you can be right or you can be safe. Like it's not always about fighting. Like sometimes we need to look at things through other people's perspectives and have a little bit of empathy. And it doesn't mean we agree with how they're acting or behaving or what they're looking for, but to try and stay safe means we may need to show a little bit of empathy. We may need to soften our approach. We may need to not always feel like we're holding this position of power and control, and that we can, you know, we're going to fight and get people to agree with us, because that's generally not how it works. Okay. All right. Now we're going to move on to some of the fun stuff. We're going to talk about the legislation, some of the definitions. I don't want to read all of the slides verbatim because I don't think that's a good use of our time. But what we want to try and do, and with Teresa's help today, is to look at what the legislation says and what does it actually mean? How do we interpret that in a way that is going to help keep your workplace safer? So essentially, when it comes to the definition of workplace violence, it means either someone has used physical aggression against a worker in the workplace, right, and caused, you know, physical harm, or attempted to physically harm someone through the use of aggression and force, or a threat, right? So it can be a threat to use force against a worker in the workplace. Now, This can be any individual. So this is not just between workers. This can be any individual that enters your workplace. It can be a customer, a client, a colleague, coworker. It can be a family member. It can be a contractor, a student, anybody that, meets this definition of attempt, uses physical force, or threatens to use physical force is defined as workplace violence. Tracy, do you have anything you want to add to that, just around understanding what workplace violence is and what it's not, maybe like any of those boundaries?
No, I think it's pretty clear, the use, the attempt, the threat. I think if you look at it that way, I have investigated all three of those. So it's every circumstance is different. So that's the really important reason for the investigation, is to see if, first of all, did it occur? Did it meet the definition? As an inspector at the Ministry of Labor, we're very focused on definitions when we're looking at things.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Yeah, thanks. I know I've seen times where people are like, well, they weren't hurt, so it wasn't workplace violence, but that is not true, right? We want people to we want to encourage workers to report so that you can do an investigation of all of these types of incidents of violence or potential workplace violence. Because if people are not reporting and you don't have an opportunity to investigate, you're losing this chance to put controls and fix things before it actually does hurt someone. So really encouraging people to report any threat, any attempt at violence, not just when individuals are physically injured.
And to remember that the employer can't fix something they don't know about,
That's right.
right?
Yep. And to that point, it actually is the duty of the worker in Ontario to report hazards in the workplace, and people can be a hazard. So if you have customers or clients or there's situations in the workplace that had the potential to cause a worker harm, it is their duty to report those to you, right? That's right in the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So it's not just a nice to do, report hazards, it's actually a duty of workers in Ontario. So in Ontario, we have requirements. So this is under section 32.0.1 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act, where we get into the requirements under workplace violence. So a policy, an employer must have a policy, right? They must review it once a year, post it. Workers must be aware of what that policy is. It has to commit the employer's, requirements and obligations to protect workers, and state some of the roles and responsibilities that everybody in the workplace has to support that policy and program. I'm going to pause for a second and just jump over to the chat for a minute because we have some questions related to the definition, I believe. So we've got, can we know more about attempt? Is it intentions based on need of physical evidence? If there are two people involved in workplace violence incident, how do you investigate an attempt as an employer? So an attempt is any time someone tries to harm someone. It can be throwing something. It can be, if someone tried to hit someone but missed and didn't actually cause an injury, that's still an attempt at violence. And yes, so even if it was between two individuals in the workplace, that still needs to be investigated. So you would talk to both parties, you would get statements if there were witnesses, you would talk to all of those individuals that maybe witnessed or saw or were aware of the incident. But yeah, absolutely still needs to be investigated as an attempt. I hope I answered that question. Teresa, I don't know if you have anything to add.
No, I mean, I just can't, for some reason, I can't see the chat, but that's okay. So let me so if I came in and there was, somebody reported an incident to me that two workers were beating each other up at a workplace. This has happened, okay? There's an assault. First thing I would say is, I want to see your policy, I want to see your program, I want to see your training, and I want to see your investigation into this workplace incident. And those are the things we're going to look at. And then from an enforcement perspective, we would look at we would write orders if those components were missing. An assault on somebody is a criminal offense. I highly encourage people to report those things to the police, and we run parallel investigations. But really for us, it is an administrative piece of legislation. But you have to investigate it.
Yeah, and I think to add to sort of the question is around if there is no evidence, like if it's like a he said, or he said, she said, and maybe there isn't physical evidence, or maybe you don't have any, CCTV footage showing that interaction or what happened, it still needs to be investigated. You still need to get both statements, because maybe this isn't the first time it's happened, right? And maybe it will happen again. And again, any investigation, and it's very common even for harassment, right? Where there's not any physical evidence that someone was harassed, but it doesn't mean it didn't happen, right? So we encourage people to be as specific when they're reporting about time that it happened, where it happened. If there were no witnesses, it still needs to be reported, because it can also help show a history of behavior or a history of incidents that are happening in the workplace. And maybe that means when someone does report it, that a manager or a supervisor is going to have a little bit more of a pulse on that interaction or those individuals or that situation. And maybe they'll go and, if it's always, first thing in the morning, or when people are, leaving a team meeting, I don't know, whatever is going on, then they can just be a little bit more aware and, try to be there to support.
I think if you get into that situation where there's no evidence, you still have to investigate it. And if both parties are denying it, then, and there's no evidence, then you've done what you've needed to do. If you're aware of it kind of in the background as an HR professional or operations person, that's kind of the information where you go, yeah, I know there could be an issue between these two, but let's talk to them. If they absolutely deny it, just make that as part of your investigation.
Yeah, but at least it's on file that it was investigated. So if there, again, are future incidents that pop up, then it might show a pattern of behavior. Okay, thank you for your questions. Appreciate it. Okay, so workplace violence program. So the Act not only requires that workplaces have a policy in place around workplace violence, but that they have a program to support that policy. So for workplace violence, you have to be able to show that you are trying to control the identified risks. So in Ontario, all workplaces have to do a workplace violence risk assessment. And this is something that, you're looking at, what are those potential hazards and risks that your workers face in incidents of workplace violence. So of course it can always be between staff. Like, you've always got a risk that there are individuals in the workplace that could become violent with each other. If you're dealing with the public, right, whether it's your customers, your clients, if you're in healthcare, it's your patients, what is the risk factors that those individuals could put workers at risk for violence? Those are the things that you're looking at. A good workplace violence risk assessment, which we're going to cover actually in the next Safety Connection. So if you don't have that, or if you're looking to improve your risk assessment process for violence, then certainly tune into the next Safety Connection. But it really is looking at what are all of those aspects of work, of how we work, of who we interact with, of what supports are in place, of how we summon assistance, of where people park, can they safely get into the building, how do they get back to their car safely? All of those things should be looked at in a workplace violence risk assessment. So once you have those risks identified, you need to take steps to control them. Okay. And then it also needs to detail sort of, how do we investigate these incidents? Who do people report to? What are we going to do to minimize those risks? Oh, and thank you. Jessica has just popped in the chat the next Safety Connection. So if you don't already have it in your calendar, that's certainly something that you're going to want to check out. And training for employees, right? Have employees been trained? Are they aware of what the risks are, what the hazards are associated with violence, and have we trained them on how to stay safe and the elements of the program? Teresa, anything specific when you go into workplaces, and you're obviously looking to make sure that workplaces have a violence program in place as part of the legislation, but anything specifically that you notice maybe is often not there, or things you'd be looking for?
I think some of the stuff when I look at it is very wordy and flowery, but there's no concrete methods, right? So some of the immediate assistance means right away. So a lot of workplaces fall a little short on that. And so that needs to be kind of reviewed. I'm working alone. I've got a customer come in. I feel threatened. how do I get help? Where do I go? That sort of thing. So we like to see concrete measures in that.
Yeah, and I know we've
An
talked
investigation.
before. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. No, I don't see a lot of written measures and procedures for violence programs that there's always something there. They always have, it's usually pretty fulsome, but there's sections, consider similar workplaces. How do you summon immediate
Mm.
assistance? Those are the ones that are kind of difficult, right? So those are the things I kind of make suggestions for.
Yeah, so if we are a little, even to throw some examples out there, and I know Teresa and I have talked about this in the past, about what is sort of reasonable as far as being able to summon immediate assistance. So typically, if your program only states like call 911 if there's someone that's threatening, okay, that might be appropriate, especially if someone has a weapon. But there are still other steps that may be appropriate to your workplace that can help keep individuals safe, right, in the short term, because who knows when emergency services is going to be able to respond, and that might be too long. So if you're in a mall or like different types of retail establishments, do you have security? How do you call security? Do you have other sort of coworkers or colleagues that are trained? How do you get that sort of emergency response team activated? If you're in a mall, how do you call mall security? Or maybe the store next door, you need to alert them and get some help and support. Maybe there's ways, different phones or panic buttons. I don't know, but the idea is you want to view and think about all of those different ways that someone can access help immediately, right? That's going to either minimize the damage or minimize that risk of injury, or get people to come and support you, or how you even remove yourself from a situation safely where that alleged perpetrator or individual that's acting aggressively and violently won't be able to cause an injury. Okay.
Yep,
So
every workplace is its own animal, right? It's got to be workplace specific.
absolutely. Lots of things to think about. When you do your risk assessment, like there are questions that are asked around like, do you have a safe place for people to go where they can, go and lock a door and be safe from potential perpetrators? So those are the things that you would want to consider. Okay, I'm going to jump to the chat for just a quick second. The question is it possible to know this topic comes under the area of HR or safety? I've been to a vendor where two departments were struggling to put it under a functional banner. So it is a good question. This, to me, workplace violence and harassment actually is under the purview of occupational health and safety because it is in the Occupational Health and Safety Act. That doesn't mean that there aren't aspects of this topic that fall under HR. And I think a well-functioning, workplace, HR and health and safety should be working very closely together. So while the prevention piece, making sure there's ways to report, making sure that the Joint Health and Safety Committee or your safety rep is well versed in this topic and is looking for hazards and you're doing your risk assessment, that to me is very occupational health and safety focused. There will be a time and a place where maybe a harassment investigation is done by HR because maybe they have the skill set, that is who it is reported to, and that's more of an HR function. But making sure that you have the policies and the programs in place, I would suggest is very much part of a health and safety group.
So when we go in for workplace harassment complaints, where the person wants us to look at, well, we don't look at the investigation, but they say, I put in a complaint of workplace harassment. They did an investigation. I don't know the outcome. I didn't get a letter. Nothing. We will need to meet with the worker rep or Joint Health and Safety Committee member, a manager member. And then basically we go, hey, we've got this complaint of workplace harassment. Now I got to go speak to HR. You don't get to know anything about it, but I will do a field visit, which is very minimal. And it will say the employer conducted an investigation. The employer didn't conduct an investigation. Here's your order. Here's, there's been no outcome letter, here's your order. So that's kind of how HR and OC Health will meet on that issue.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Teresa. And I think your program and your policy clearly define the roles and responsibilities. So it is important, like even through that everybody knows what their role is, who's doing the investigation, where do we report things to, who's doing, the risk assessment, the proactive piece, understanding the hazards, who's responsible for putting controls in place. Where does the Joint Health and Safety Committee fit into this conversation, and making sure that they, again, are monitoring for hazards and in their inspections. So it really is, we talk about internal responsibility system, which I know maybe everybody's heard of or not, but essentially that means that like one person doesn't own health and safety at your workplace. It is all of the workplace parties working together. That's going to include HR, that's going to include health and safety, that's going to include managers, supervisors, the employer, workers. Everybody has a role to play in making sure that people stay safe. So it's really hard to just say it's this person or it's this person, because that's truly not how it works. And that's not how the legislation was designed. Okay, keep moving on here. So that was the program. This is the risk assessment. So I already touched on this, but essentially your risk assessment can't just be, oh yeah, we looked and like everything seems fine. It has to consider the nature of the workplace, so the type of work that you're doing, as well as the conditions of work. So if you have people that are traveling, right, and part of their work requires them to travel and go to different workplaces or go to different buildings, or it requires them to maybe work remotely or in a hybrid type environment, or the nature of the work, working with customers and clients, is immediately puts individuals at higher risk. Maybe it's in a mall, right? Maybe it's in a strip plaza or whatever we call those. I think that's still what they're called. Strip mall? Anyway, strip mall, okay. But it has to consider all of those things, right? Is it a high risk area, right? Is it a high prevalence for crime? Yeah, big box retailers, absolutely. Like there's so many things. Are we monitoring sort of who's coming and going? Is it so big that there's places people can hide and we're not aware of who's present? If it's just a public building, anybody can come and go. There's no sort of, controlled access. So all of that should be covered in your workplace violence risk assessment, because those factors do increase the risk. You have to share your findings of that assessment with your Joint Health and Safety Committee. Again, I know there's a lot of larger retailers, it looks like, on the call today, so that's important. But share that with your Joint Health and Safety Committee, right? And then if there are sort of areas that have been identified as high risk, you got to put controls in place to minimize that, right? So it looks like I'm reading the chat here. I'm going to read it out since Teresa can't really see the chat. So the comment is, we recently purchased personal safety alarms for all staff after a risk assessment was completed, and staff expressed concern about walking to their vehicles alone at night. Staff response is that they feel this measure, one of many, as we truly care about their well-being while still being required to offer services to all members of the public. The onus is on them to be safe, and have refused the device. Okay. Interesting comment. So if an employer requires a employee, and Teresa, you can certainly help me out here if I am leading people astray, but if the organization and the employer has identified a piece of personal protective equipment that is required for an employee to wear to minimize their risk of injury, it is mandatory. Like if that's in the policy that this is part of your PPE requirements, and that has been communicated and workers have been trained, and people then can't refuse to wear it. It is a required PPE, like personal protective device. Anything to add, Teresa?
No, that's 100% true. So workers are required to use a device. Now I'm spitballing. Workers are required to use a device as the PPE that the employer requires them to wear, and the supervisors have to ensure that they wear it. So I have written orders to workers and supervisors because they're not doing that. So writing orders to them would be the way I would write orders to an employer. And I write them because they're cheaper than a ticket and they're very effective. So if my employer gives me something to wear and use, I'm required to do that. And my supervisor has to ensure that I wear it. And then what I would say to the supervisor is, show me how you did that. How do you ensure that? And for me, it would be showing me audits, that they audited people to make sure that people were wearing it. Sometimes people forget. There should be a control process. Like if you've got a program in place, you need to teach people the expectations, when they have to wear it, where they have to wear it, how to use it, make sure they check it that it's functioning, that its batteries are good, that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess it comes down to like, is it mandatory? right, in your workplace that people wear this device? Is it optional? Because there can be some forms of PPE, like if, you know, that are optional, if it's not maybe required by the employer, but people feel more comfortable wearing it and using it. So I guess you need to decide as the employer, is this protective device mandatory? Because we've done a risk assessment and this was considered high risk. So we are implementing this form of PPE to make sure that our workers are safe and have a means of summoning assistance. Or is it optional, right? Is it a sort of nice to have if people want it because it makes them feel safer, then we have it available to them. So you need to decide if it's mandatory or optional. And if it's mandatory, then absolutely you have to go through the process to make sure with your supervisors, through training, through all of those things, that people are wearing it and using it. Otherwise, it does kind of come back to the supervisor to make sure they are doing those audits and doing their due diligence.
I hold them both accountable.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's fair.
Yep. Okay, perfect. Hopefully that answers your question, Lorraine. And then doing the reassessment. So the workplace violence risk assessment is not a one and done. The legislation doesn't specify that you have to do it annually or that it has to be reassessed every year, but it has to be reassessed if conditions in the workplace have changed. Let's say you have an expansion, or you've, you know, got a new building, or you've, you know, increased your workforce or decreased, or you've put different measures and procedures in place for workplace violence, then you need to reassess, right, and understand what the current risks are. So under duties, responsibilities, so employers, they again have to have a policy. It has to be reviewed at least annually and posted. Develop and maintain a workplace violence program, that we talked about that already. Do the risk assessment, take every precaution reasonable. So this is sort of the general duty clause under the Occupational Health and Safety Act in Ontario that applies to both employers and supervisors. This idea of doing everything reasonable in the circumstances to protect the safety of workers. This also includes domestic violence. We're going to touch on that in a minute. And provide information and instruction. So it's one thing to have a policy and program, but workers need to be trained on it. They need to know what it is, what those measures and procedures are, what their role is to keep themselves safe. And that can include, again, wearing those protective devices, or how to summon assistance, where to go, what to do, all of those things. Employers and supervisors, again, this every reasonable precaution sort of statement, the general duty clause. And I guess, you know, I would have to deflect to Teresa here about interpreting the general duty clause. I'm sure that's like a loaded question. What is reasonable? Yeah. I mean, I'm sure everybody interprets that slightly differently. Kristen. Yeah, I'm sorry. I feel like you're more well equipped to answer it than I am.
So the general duty clause is kind of interesting, right? Because when we look at it, it really is a case-by-case basis for a complaint or an accident, you know, that sort of thing. But what I will say is when we use that order, we cannot prescribe what you're supposed to do. So I can't say, I could write a 25-2H order for the hazard of falling more than 10 feet, but I can't say you will use this, you will use the following equipment to do that. We can't prescribe because it's up to the employer to, that's their duty to figure that out. So that's where it's kind of a tricky piece of legislation.
Yeah, so case by case. So, if something doesn't seem reasonable, then you can write an order, but you can't tell them what is reasonable.
I can't give you examples. I can't prescribe the answers for you. But if you've come up with multiple things and I'm like, yep, that seems reasonable. You know, it really is. It's hard for me to answer that, Christy.
I know.
If I had a clear situation, I might be able to, but then again, there's always so many elements. Now, the other thing is, and I think we're going to get to it, is, you know, you have to consider similar workplaces. That's a really big one for me. You know, those are reasonable precautions. If other workplaces are doing it, why aren't you?
Mm-hmm. Yep, that makes sense. Okay. So we have to inform workers of risks. So that's, again, part of supervisor responsibilities as well, is to inform workers of the hazards associated with the work that they're being asked to do. Respond, right? And this can be immediate response, but also doing your investigations, right? And putting steps and strategies in place, controls in place to minimize the risk that it happens again. Okay. workers have to know the policy and program. So workers are not free from duties and responsibilities under the Act, right? They need to work safely. They need to use the protective devices that are provided. They need to report hazards that exist. If there's potential incidents or there was a near miss, they need to report that to their employer. And if workers are in immediate danger, they need to keep themselves safe. So this can mean going to a safe place, following the procedures. Again, you should have response protocols in place if someone does feel threatened or is being aggressed upon, and know what to do, where to go, and how to report that. Okay, we're touching on domestic violence quickly because I think a lot of people often think that domestic violence is not a workplace hazard or a risk in the workplace. Domestic violence is listed in the Occupational Health and Safety Act as a potential threat and harm to workers. So if workers fear that an alleged abuser may enter the workplace and put them at risk, if someone gets assaulted or abused at work, whether it is from an intimate partner relationship or a customer or client, that is still workplace violence. So there are things that are expected of the employer to keep victims or potential victims of workplace violence safe while they are at work. What you don't want to do is tell someone if they come to you as a victim of domestic violence that they should stay home and stay safe. The truth is the workplace may actually be a safer place for them, right? And coming to work and, you know, having some of those protocols in place and being around other people may be exactly what they need. So if you know or reasonably should know or be aware that there is a risk of a worker being injured by domestic violence in the workplace, you need to take steps to keep them safe. And again, you want to maintain as much privacy and confidentiality as possible, but the fact is people may need to know, right? You may need to get security involved or other coworkers and colleagues. You may need to have a buddy system. We refer to it as a safe work plan. And if you need a template for that, we can send that as a resource, just of what it can be included in a safe work plan. Again, every workplace is different depending on whether you have security available, whether you have controlled access, or, you know, all of this. There's so many things to consider. But again, just do something to try and keep them safe. Ask them what they need, how they want to be supported. Anything, Teresa, that you want to add?
Yeah, I think the violence legislation came out of in Ontario, out of the Windsor area, because of a death of a nurse. There was a physician nurse thing going on, and it was brought to HR, and it was ignored basically, or not addressed properly. There was another issue with like a violence thing at the London Police Department. I don't think it's all London. I just want to say that. But, there were 3 people and 2 of them ended up getting killed. So this is where this comes from, right? If the employer knows, they have to do something about it. If the employer hears in the background that there's something going on, the expectation would be they need to follow up and see if that's true and then put control measures in place or document the fact that there is nothing here. So this legislation, although very administrative from an enforcement perspective, came out of real issues.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. And it can be really hard for people to come forward. So just always show like sensitivity and care and concern if someone does come forward with concerns about an alleged abuser entering the workplace. Okay, so now we get a little more information from Teresa. We're going to talk about limitations. And I'm going to tell you a perspective that I hear a lot from customers, and then Teresa, maybe you can just clarify. I hear that workers often think that if they don't like the results of a harassment or an investigation that happens in the workplace, that they can call the ministry and an inspector will come and reinvestigate a complaint of harassment or violence. Or they think that, they can change the outcomes or, make sure that, different witnesses were talked to that maybe weren't in the first place. So maybe, Teresa, you can just clarify for everybody, if you do come on, if there's a complaint or anonymous complaint that gets called into the ministry, what you can and can't do when you enter the workplace to investigate.
For harassment?
Yes. Or violence. Okay. Yeah. Well, let's do harassment because I feel like it's more likely.
Harassment is, I would say, is probably the biggest stuff. That's the biggest things we deal with now. So the limitations of the inspector, we don't investigate workplace harassment. So when you call the call center for the Ministry of Labor in Ontario, if I say, there's harassment going on at my workplace, this person harassed me, and I need you to check the policies and procedures, and I want to put a complaint in. Okay. So you cannot be anonymous for a workplace harassment complaint if you want me to go in to see if there was one done. You've got to give your name, because I can't be specific, right? If you don't want to give your name, then we can always go in and say, do you have a policy? Do you have a procedure? Have you done the training? That sort of thing. So when we get complaints at the Ministry of Labor, we get complaints that are anonymous where the person, and in general complaints, an anonymous complaint comes in, it comes to the call center. They can either leave their name, leave their phone number, their contact information, and it can still remain anonymous, but at least I have the ability to contact them and say, hey, can you be more specific about this complaint, right? The anonymous non-verifiable is they don't leave anything. So I go into a workplace and I go, are you guys aware of this? And a lot of times they aren't. So it makes it very difficult to investigate. Those would be general complaints. But if you want me to go in and look at whether an investigation done or an outcome letter was presented, I need your name. I need to know that there was a complaint put in. So it gets a little bit tricky. We also get complaints from the public. Have parents call in for their sons or daughters who work in police departments. I've had complaints from the public that they see like a meat cutter that's not guarded in a retail, in like a Subway or something like that. So we do get complaints from the public and we will investigate them. It's best to give us information. If you want to remain anonymous, you can be totally anonymous, non-verifiable. You can be anonymous and give us our name, but I will say if there's charges laid, your name's going to come out. We can't keep that from you.
Perfect. Thanks, Teresa.
Does that make sense?
So it does. I think the bottom line is like, Teresa's not going to go in and reinvestigate a harassment complaint.
You don't have any authority.
Yeah.
No.
So
I have one. Yep. I have one now. It's very complex. It involves human rights. It's discrimination. It's harassment. It is a doozy, and the worker has given me permission to bring their name forward. So basically, I show up. I go. I've got a workplace harassment complaint from Jane Doe. She said that it occurred around this time. Have you conducted an investigation? Yes or no? It's just that black and white. Yes, we have. Excellent. Do you have any outcomes? Yes. Did you provide those written outcomes to the alleged harasser and harassee? Yes. That's it. That's all we do. I may at times go, if somebody calls back and says it wasn't an appropriate investigation, then, we would say to them, I would say, what part of that's not appropriate? Well, they didn't talk to Sarah over there. And then I'll go back and go, did you talk to Sarah, to the employer? And they go, no, why didn't you? Well, they're friends. Well, go back and talk to Sarah. So that's kind of how it rolls out. We don't ever take copies. We don't look at it. Nothing. Mm-hmm. It's very disappointing, isn't it? Just yeah.
Well, I mean, it certainly, I'm sure, can be frustrating for both inspectors. Yeah, yes. Because so you can't really dive in.
When we have these chats, we are to make 3 points of contact. We try to contact the complainant 3 times, and if we don't hear back, then we close the case. And I don't think I've ever done that since the legislation came out. You can always get a hold of somebody. Right. But these are long conversations, so I like to set up the expectations right away, because I don't remember, I'm an investigator. I don't need to know how it affects you. I understand how that could possibly be. So I try and set expectations. Look, I can see if they did investigation. I can write an order to do an investigation. I cannot change the outcomes. I can't get your job back. I can't get you money. Those are the things that I say people. And the other question I ask is, what is your expectation for this? And then we kind of go from there.
Okay. All right. So with that in mind, we're going to go to our next poll question. So everybody get ready. So the poll question is, and maybe Jessica can pop this up for us, a worker can call with a complaint if they don't like the outcome of a harassment investigation. And the Ministry of Labor, Immigration Training and Skills Development Inspector, so Teresa, will go in and review the investigation and or agree or disagree with the findings. What do you think? Is that true, false, or we're still not really sure? Okay. Okay. Ooh. I'll give it another 10 seconds or so. Okay. So the answer to this is false. So the inspector will not go in and review the investigation. They are not going to go in and look at all of the statements, what HR or whoever did, and agree or disagree with the findings, right? It is not up to them to say whether the investigation is right or wrong, right? They're going to go and make sure that there is a process, that they have the policy, that they have the program, that if there's a name, that an investigation did happen, but they do not have the authority to agree or disagree with the findings.
So there is one little tool that we have. We can write orders for a third party to do the harassment investigation. I think I've written it once. It's very, very expensive to do that for the employer. So I always suggest that, is there somebody who's competent that can do this investigation for you? This becomes a real issue with the smaller workplaces, especially if we have family members in leadership roles and workers who have alleged that the father or somebody has, harassed them. So it's not that we don't want to know. We can point you in the right direction. We can write a third party order, but it's very rare.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that is in the legislation that a third party can be ordered.
I can write that. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. There was a question around, is this when you get a lawyer involved? So, I mean, that entirely depends on the organization and the employer if they want to get legal counsel or not. We at WSPS, and I'm sure at the ministry, we don't recommend when you should or should not seek legal counsel related to these incidents, but certainly if it's outside of your ability to control, to manage, or you think you might be at legal risk, then that would be when you would want to, take those steps. But we can't advise on that.
If the worker chooses to get a lawyer, I don't have control of that. If the employer gets a lawyer, I don't have any control of that. It's still, do you have a policy? Do you have a procedure? Did you do an investigation? Is there an outcome? Did you train your workers? Did you provide that outcome in writing?
Perfect. So the definition of harassment, of workplace harassment, again, there's all of these definitions that are not, I don't want to say they're up for debate or interpretation, but it's not really clear, right? Like engaging in a course of vexatious comment or conduct against a worker. Well, what is vexatious? And is it a course? Does that mean it can be a one-time thing, or does it have to happen multiple times to be considered a course of vexatious comment or conduct? So there's lots of different ways that this definition sort of can be looked at. This is a new definition. So if you don't have a 2025 Occupational Health and Safety Act, this is a definition that did change to include virtual through the use of information and communications technology. That didn't used to be part of the definition of harassment, and it now is. It's also now included in workplace sexual harassment.
It was happening a lot. It was happening a lot.
Yeah. So again, important with how work is changing, ministry recognizes that and has taken steps to, update that definition to make sure employers and everybody is aware that people can be harassed and sexually harassed virtually. It doesn't have to be in person. Now, it does not include reasonable action taken by an employer or supervisor to manage or direct workers. You know, employers and supervisors are allowed to performance manage. They are allowed to hold people accountable for inappropriate actions and behaviors. And as long as that is done safely and, you know, not with an intent to hurt or harm, then that is absolutely sort of part of their scope of managing workers.
Yeah, so I had one at a restaurant. Um, a worker was a server, and part of her duties, they asked her to go outside and pull weeds and clean the washrooms. And she felt that was workplace harassment. That's direction of work. The only way I would get involved is, okay, well, if you think that's harassment, did they do an investigation? Or, okay, well, if she's cleaning the bathrooms, what PPE are you giving her for that new entity to her job? If she's outside in the sun, what kind of control measures do you have in place for exposure to sun? Those sort of things. But that's direction of work.
Yeah.
If my
Yeah.
boss told me I had to work in Windsor for 2 weeks, I live in London, I would have to go to Windsor for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Which I wouldn't mind.
Windsor is fine.
Yeah.
All right. So we'll get into this a little bit more. Workplace sexual harassment. So again, engaging in that course of vexatious comment or conduct, but now this can be because of sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression, where the course or comment is known or ought reasonably known to be unwelcome, or it can be making a sexual solicitation or advance when that individual is in a position of power, essentially, to confer, deny, or grant a benefit. Okay.
So
Are there any?
I've had a few of these.
Yeah. And
Some of them lead to sexual assault. So then again, we have parallel investigations with the police services. So we focus on policy, program. You guys are gonna get sick of me. Training, that sort of thing. As part of that investigation, the police will probably request our notes and our documents and that sort of thing. And we respectfully will step back while they're investigating, if it's a sexual assault, while the investigation is going on, and we will keep in contact with the police officer to say, when you're done, let us know, right?
Yep. Yeah. So anything else about the definition? I often get questions. I don't know if anybody in the, wants to chime in on the chat if you have specific questions about harassment, the definition. But sometimes, again, it can be bullying. It doesn't have to be like multiple times. There can be a one-time incident that still qualifies as harassment, correct, Teresa?
Yes and no. So let me give you an example.
Okay.
I had a supervisor. It was a building maintenance worker. And the supervisor called him stupid. You're stupid. And they put in a complaint for workplace harassment. So I went to the supervisor and I said, "Did you call him stupid?" He's like, "Yeah, I called him stupid." I go, "Is that the right way you should be speaking to your workers?" Well, he is stupid. Like, this is how basic it gets. But for that, there was an investigation because there were other behaviors that the supervisor was doing, right? Every time they talked to him, they rolled their eyes, they tisked, they were like, muttered under their breath. So the one time verbalization of stupid was kind of added with all those things going on. I think at the end of the day, just do the investigation. It
Mhm.
it somewhere down the line, especially with the really complex ones, it's really important. If there's outside lawyers involved, if outside human rights is involved, and it's not, if you have one of those incidences, it's very easy to do an investigation, especially if you just have two people.
Okay. Yeah. So anytime something's reported, do your investigations. Try
Yeah, it's
to,
for violence and harassment. Just
yeah.
yeah. Because they will always call me and go, "But it wasn't just that, it was this." And then I go, "Okay, then I go in and it was that. It was extra. It was more than that. So
Mhm.
that's kind of my yes and no answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking like,
Case by case.
even, well, yeah, and even around like workplace sexual harassment, like if someone makes a very inappropriate sexual comment or shares explicit
Yeah.
photos or something like that, it doesn't have to be a course, it can be that one time, and that can still qualify as workplace
Yeah.
sexual harassment.
Investigate it. Yeah.
Okay, so we've got another question in the chat. How does the investigator make a very subjective area to a narrow objective idea?
I don't know that I understand what
I'm
that
not
is.
sure I understand that question entirely either. How does the
investigator make a very subjective area to very narrow objective data? So when you're doing your investigation, you have to be competent if you're doing a harassment. So you've experienced, knowledge, and training. A lot of times this stuff is subjective. It's hard to find any evidence of workplace violence or harassment unless you catch somebody on a camera or you've got witnesses, and that's why it's important to talk to witnesses. I'm not sure if that's what you mean. Is there more that you can add?
All right,
Something
we'll
a
keep
little bit
moving along, and
more
if there's
specific?
if there's more info added into the chat, then we'll jump back to that idea.
Yeah.
So similar to workplace violence, an employer, human behavior is a very huge subjective area. I understand what they're saying now. Like if what I think or I do, I don't consider to be workplace sexual harassment or harassment at all, but someone interprets it as that because it's unwanted or unwelcome, maybe because there's different cultural differences in behavior in the workplace, or what's considered appropriate for one person might not be considered appropriate for another, or vexatious using the definition. Thoughts about that?
Investigate it.
Investigate it, yeah.
Yeah, investigate
And
it.
here's the thing, like part of the definition, and this is what I tell people all the time when we do training on this, is the definition includes is known or ought reasonably known to be unwelcome. Maybe someone genuinely didn't know that saying that was unwanted or unwelcome. But if there is an investigation and it is now communicated to them that that is absolutely not appropriate, not wanted, and it's unwelcome behavior, if that continues, then it's absolutely harassment. Right? But if someone needs to know that that behavior is unwanted or unwelcome, because again, we all have different backgrounds. We were all raised in different ways. We all have different ideas of what appropriate workplace conduct and behavior is. You should have policies on this so that everybody's on the same page. But if someone needs a reminder, they genuinely had no idea that telling that joke would be interpreted as unwanted or unwelcome, you tell them. Because you did your investigation, you make sure now they know that that is not appropriate workplace behavior. It's unwanted and unwelcome. Hopefully they apologize and change their behavior. If they don't, then that could be workplace harassment. All right.
Good answer.
Thanks. I've said that a few times over my career. Okay, so your policy, and what's interesting about the harassment legislation is your policy has to be in writing, your program has to be in writing. It must illustrate, again, the employer's commitment to workers to protect them from workplace harassment, outline sources of harassment, again, state everybody in the workplace's roles and responsibilities. It has to be signed by the highest level of management and posted in a conspicuous area for that organization. Okay, so the elements.
We write a lot of orders for that.
Yeah. Oh, one good point that maybe we haven't touched on is a workplace violence. So you have to have essentially workplace violence and workplace harassment policies, but you can have one policy that covers both areas as long as all of the requirements are met. And I've seen a lot of workplaces that have a violence and harassment policy. That's fine, right? They don't have to be separate. And we will provide you with resources. If you don't have a policy and you're on the call today, we will provide you with resources. We have a toolbox that has some templates and things like that. So we won't leave you high and dry to create something from scratch. We have examples of what that can look like. So the required elements, you have to identify who people are supposed to report incidents of harassment to. And what's unique about harassment is that you also have to indicate who, like that there's another individual that can be the person you report to in the event that your designated reporting person is your alleged harasser. I get questions about this all the time, Teresa.
Me
I'm
too.
going to put you on the spot because there's different workplaces that think that, oh, it has to be someone external to the workplace that we report incidents of harassment to, or an option to report incidents of harassment to. But that's not always the case, right? You can have different
No.
individuals within the workplace as options.
Yeah, so if you are a Tim Hortons or any kind of business that has lots of branches, you can have somebody. So if HR usually, let's say it's a CEO, and that's going to have to be probably a third party because everybody reports to the CEO. But if it's a director and there's people above a director, they could do the investigations. A director from another branch could do the investigation as long as they're competent. So you can have internal people do it. Just don't have, like, I would, as the CEO, you can't have anybody below you do that investigation. That's not appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you meant?
Yeah. Yeah, and also just the reporting piece. So if your supervisor is the alleged harasser, you have to have someone other than your supervisor that you can report that incident to. And then obviously the appropriateness of who's doing that investigation, right? Whether it is HR or it's a director or, someone from the board, whatever however your workplace is set up.
So what I liked procedures for reporting incidents to person other than the employer or the supervisor. Sometimes workers feel like they can't report it to anybody, the harassment to anybody. So that's when they can call the call center and tell us. And then we go in and we go, so and so claims that there's an incident. Now, I prefer that people deal with this internally, but we can do that. And you can see us come in and go, hey, we got a complaint of workplace harassment for Jane. Are you guys aware of it? No. Or yes, like is mostly the answer. But yeah.
Okay. All right. So you have to, again, have procedures for investigating, and there are specific requirements for harassment around that investigation and communicating the outcomes of the investigation. So you want to keep as much information private and confidential on a need-to-know basis, but you do have to disclose the results of the investigation and corrective actions to both the worker who filed the complaint, right? The alleged, I don't want to say victim, but the alleged, the party that brought the concern forward, as well as the perpetrator.
So let me see. So I get a lot of this, what needs to be in the letter. And what I say is just stick to the legislation. Look at our description. We find that in the incidents of Bob and Jane, workplace harassment as defined under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, and I encourage people to listen, did not occur for the events of the dates, blah, 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 blah. Or we find that it did occur, and what we're going to do is we're going to do retraining for everybody in respect in the workplace. If you have something that you're going to do, but just really, if you're going to be issuing those letters, just be very focused on our legislation. Don't bring in anybody else's legislation.
Okay. Yeah, and there's a question in the chat. Sorry, go ahead, Teresa.
No, I don't. But I think maybe the Ministry of Labor might have one in that package, but really just go to the legislation. You have to make a decision and you can use the wording in the legislation. We've investigated this incident, which was between, such and such and such and such. I would suggest that if you're a bigger corporation, you could have legal create one for you, because I will tell you that these letters that you provide, they travel. They travel to lawyers, they travel to human rights, they travel all over the place. I had somebody post theirs in a manufacturing plant with everybody's name on it. So then another harassment investigation had to be done. So they do travel. So I would just say be very cautious about what you put in there.
Yeah, and I think we may have a template for you at WSPS as well. So let's we will take that away. Amanda, and we'll find something for you. I'm sure it's either in our toolbox or in one of the building blocks that we now have. So yeah, let me take that one away and see what we can find. Okay, so employer duties with regards to workplace harassment. So again, consult with the Joint Health and Safety Committee or a safety rep when developing this program. Review it at least once a year or as often as necessary if there are changes, and then provide worker information and training. It's one thing, again, to have the policy and program, but if you haven't trained people and communicated what that says to workers, they still don't know who to report to. They don't know what the definition of harassment is. They don't know what the investigation should look like. So you really do need to communicate the contents of that program to workers. Okay, and then obviously investigate using competent and qualified investigators to do these investigations as appropriate. You have to inform people, we just talked about that, and then any other duties. Okay, there's another question, a loose thought, but if harassment is done by authority, by someone with an authority role, then there is only return to work policies are required and normal businesses carry on. Okay, let me think here.
I don't think I understand that.
So if the harassment is
Yeah.
done by a person in a position of authority, I'm not sure where the return to work policies fall into that. Normal business carry on.
So for us, it's like, did you do it from the ministry standpoint?
Mm-hmm.
No matter who it is in your corporation, if there's a complaint or incident that you're aware of, did you do an investigation? Did you provide an outcome letter? Return to work sometimes falls into it when you want to separate two people on different shifts. I don't know if that's part of your outcomes that you're going to do. But again, case by case. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I would say one thing, because I've seen it a few times, is sometimes if there is an incident of harassment between staff, or even someone that's in a supervisory or position of authority or management and a worker, is often what happens is they change the shift or the team that worker is on. That's not always appropriate, right? You have to look at both sides, and because you don't want it to be seen as punitive or reprisal, right, for the individual that reported. So once the investigation is done, names are out to everyone. How will the jobs go back to normal? So to be honest, like they're not supposed to be. So you want to maintain, yeah, as much privacy and confidentiality as possible. This is a need to know basis. It is not published, right? The investigation is not published and made aware to everyone. Even the Joint Health and Safety Committee, you don't have to provide the complete harassment investigation to the committee.
It's not a safety report.
Yeah, like you want to keep that tight. You need to get your witness statements but the findings and who's doing the investigation, you don't publish that investigation report. So really people should not know. It should not come from HR or from a supervisor or a manager. Sure, employees can talk to their colleagues and coworkers. That's outside of your ability to control, but you do have to maintain as much privacy and confidentiality as possible. Ashley's got a question. When HR is investigating a complaint, should there be a second person in the room for witnesses during the discussion with the alleged harasser or harassee?
That's not in my legislation.
It's not in the legislation. And I will say as well, I think these types of incidents are often dealt with differently depending on if there is labor involved. Like a union representative could be there to be a witness or a support for an individual that has made the complaint, or even as a witness or the alleged harasser. I think it depends on the culture of the workplace. I think if someone asks to have someone present with them while they're going through that interview or the investigation, I think that should be afforded. Like I think that should be allowed just for their level of comfort and to make sure, that things aren't being twisted. But I don't know that it's policy that there has to be. It's certainly not legislatively required.
Yeah, and we don't enforce employers' policies. We just enforce the provisions in the legislation. So that would become a decision by the employer how they will manage that. Some collective agreements have it that they are required to be in the room when these things are done.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. Hopefully that answers your question, Ashley. So that is kind of the end of the sort of formal information. Oh, Amanda's got a question. As an inspector, Teresa, what do you want to see for workplace-specific training on violence and harassment? Is it sufficient for the training to be a breakdown of the existing policy and procedure, identifying responsibilities of employee, employer, and the process to report, and the investigation process, or what else do you need to see to ensure the training complies with the legislation?
Right. So I need to see that you have written measures and procedures that follow the provisions in the legislation. So all the ones that we listed there. So if I'm a worker, I need to know that they've been trained, that they know what to do. And don't get me wrong, people who still call in and complain will say, "Well, I didn't get the training." And then I get there and I look at training records, if it's anonymous or whatever, and I go, "Oh, geez, there's their name. They had the training." So, it does happen that way. So just policies, program, training, expectations, the provisions in the legislation, because we only enforce the provisions. So all that information that you just listed, which I can't see for some reason, sounds like it's good. Now, I know WSPS and we have examples if you'd like to look at them, but I will literally take out the act and go, does the program have this? Yes. Does the program have this? Yes. Does it have this? Yes. Does it have this?
Mm-hmm.
Is that
Yeah,
helpful?
so, and I think also with training, like if you've identified hazards and risks in your risk assessment for violence and you have controls and measures in place, workers do need to be trained on what those controls are. So again, a good example is if people have to wear PPE, or if there are certain higher risk areas, or if you've identified, even individuals that could be at risk for violence, you have to train people on what those measures and procedures are so that they can keep themselves safe. That's where that workplace specific stuff comes in. You have to train people on how they're going to summon immediate assistance. That is workplace specific. That is up to your organization to share with them, what do our devices look like? Where are the phone? What do we do? How do we get help? So that is all part of that training.
It's
Okay.
again, I've said it a few times, it is very administrative legislation for us. So this is what we look for. Do you have a policy? Yes. Are you following the requirements for policies, postings in writing, not in writing? Do you have a written program? Is it posted? Do people understand it? Does that program cover the provisions in the legislation? If you want to go beyond that, one of the most frustrating things I think for inspectors is the legislation is very minimal and folks expect us to enforce more that we actually have power to enforce. So remember, it's the most minimal legislation. We can't really add to it. We don't enforce CSA standards. We don't enforce policies, and especially with administrative legislation like harassment and violence.
Right. Thanks for that. A reminder, Teresa. Just a couple things to sort of wrap up, and I see Tanya's has joined us back on camera. So WSPS can help if you are looking for some free resources. There are things that we can do. There's even some free like online training stuff for violence and harassment on our website. This is a list of different resources. We are going to email this out to everyone that registered for the Safety Connection today. So we've got, again, some of our internal resources and supports. If you're looking for policy, there's a sample risk assessment, things like that in there. I did link also the legislation. There is a great workplace violence and harassment guidance document that the ministry has published. So there's a link to that as well. It helps with some of the interpretation and what the expectations are. And then I did link the code of practice to address workplace harassment as well, Teresa. I know you had requested
you.
that be sent as a resource. So we've got that in there as well. So these will all be shared with you via email after the session. Copy of the presentation, great question. So it has been recorded. It is still sort of to be determined. This is a 3-part series. So we're going to go through, the second session is going to be on doing risk assessments and really diving into what that looks like and what should be included and how to do it. And then there's going to be a third session to just, especially focusing on the retail sector and what all of this looks like in practice and best practices and things like that, and doing investigations and how to do that to meet the requirements. The slide that I have up, yes, please, Teresa. Nope, go.
No, so the guidance document that the Ministry of Labor did for workplace harassment, it's a good one.
It is,
And,
yeah.
and so what it does is it breaks it down into provisions. It talks about general information. So when you go through that document, it will tell you, oh, best practices to have this and that. And I think it's 32 pages long. Remember when you're going through that, there's a section in provisions. That's the only thing we enforce. All the other stuff is extra, which is good. I always feel free to add more to your programs. But again, we would look just at the provisions. So when you look at that, just keep that in mind when you're going through it.
Perfect. Yeah, so the last slide that's up here is just again, like, we can help you at WSPS. Like, it certainly might not be me, but another consultant or an account manager. Like, we understand that like every organization has different resources available to help keep your workers safe. So again, if you're part of small business, if you pay WSPS or WSIB premiums, then we are here to help you. So don't be a stranger, reach out and we'll see what we can do. Certainly, if we have free resources, we will send them to you. Like, you can take them, make them your own. Like, we want to help. So yeah, just reach out and ask sort of what we have available and what we can do for you. And that does bring us to the end of our session. So I think I was going to say, like, someone asked about if this is going to be available. After all 3 parts of this 3-part series are done, then it's likely that they get posted. There are other sessions, safety connections that were done on workplace violence and harassment that are available for you to look at. And you can go anytime and check those out. I'm not going to promise that this will be posted, but we usually do. So I'm gonna just put that out there, but we'll see.
Additionally, Christy, you did mention a couple of resources throughout this presentation. So we're just going to try and find those as well and add them to the email that we send out, just so
Perfect.
everyone's aware. Okay.
Yes. Thank you so much to Teresa for joining.
Thank you, Teresa.
We love partnering with you. It's always fun.
We've done it before.
I know.
I just feel like the biggest fear for employers is sometimes they're afraid of us, right? And we're just there initially to do a compliance audit. If it's a critical or fatality related to workplace violence, it is a little bit more intensive. I would agree, but that's really why you need to have your training documents, your written measures and procedures for these sort of things. And I just like to say, hey, when I come in, this is what I'm going to look for. So it gives you some idea of what to expect when we show up.
Yep. And we all have the same goal of keeping Ontario workers safe. So whether it's through prevention, which is what we do, and Teresa coming in and making sure that you're meeting those requirements and you're doing, what you need to do, your due diligence to keep everyone safe, we all have that same goal. So again,
Christy's very skilled.
She is.
Thanks, Teresa.
Yeah.
You're welcome. Yeah.
I did see that Jessica put the link in there for the pre-recorded webinars. If anyone wants to just save that and come back later to see if they're in there.
I got a critical. I gotta go.
Oh shoot. Okay.
Thank you, Teresa.
Take care. Thanks, Teresa.
Take care.
Bye.